I've had products in the past that were purely private label. And the main thing I was competing on was just better creatives, better main image, better follow-up images and supporting images on Amazon, better A+ details page, better video content, better copy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of What's Working in E-Commerce. I'm your host, Egan Heath. I'm at Asymmetric Marketing. I'm a partner there. I just took on a business partner this year, and you can find us at asymmetric.pro. We help with paid search, paid social, email automation, WordPress websites, and Amazon marketing, and much more. So check us out there at asymmetric.pro. Today I have on an Amazon expert and e-commerce guy. I'm really excited to be speaking with Kusha Karvandi from Kazam. Kusha, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit about your e-commerce journey. How'd you get into this? And I know you've had a couple companies here, so maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, it started about 12 years ago. I was working actually at the time full-time in the gyms. I was managing a large health club in San Diego, and I had come up with an idea for a product at the time, a fitness product, but didn't know anything about e-commerce. And so it was actually my wife who kind of stumbled upon Amazon FBA at the time and said, you know what, this would be the lowest hanging fruit for us to try to get this up and running and test this idea. So we kind of used Amazon FBA initially as almost like a launch pad, almost like a Kickstarter in a way, to just see if it would work. And the product started selling maybe 20 units, 30 units a month in the beginning. And then that started growing to like 20, 30 units a day. And then eventually it became kind of a full-time thing. And I had left my job focusing on that full-time. And then over time, we just started seeing more opportunities in Amazon, more product opportunities, ended up actually launching a different product in the massage gun space, and then scaled that up to 8 figures within 12 months and sold that in 2019. And then 2020, we sold another one of our brands. And then 2021, about a year and a half later, end of 2021, we sold another portfolio of brands that I had created from scratch. And then, yeah, since then, I've just been building. I acquired a company last year, an e-commerce business, and then I built a new portfolio of e-commerce products and brands in the last couple of years and scaled that to another multiple 7 figures now as well. So hoping to continue to build things and exit them as best we can.
That's excellent. What a great experience. I'm so excited to be talking with you about this. Can you tell us a bit about the product development process? How do you come up with these ideas? And then how do you actually develop these into physical products you can sell?
Yeah, one thing I've learned is that it's best to stay in your circle of competence. And so some people might disagree and say, oh, you know what, you should sell products in any category, even if you don't know anything about it. But I found that for me to be successful, I've stayed successful staying in the health and wellness space, which is what I know best. And because my background has always been there, I feel like I have a little bit of an edge, especially since a lot of the competition on Amazon is more and more the Chinese competition. And these Chinese black hat sellers, they're coming in just copycatting. They don't necessarily have that insider knowledge. They don't understand the customer at the same depth as somebody who would be in that space, living and breathing it and actually using the product. So that's what I feel like for me, I've always stayed in that space. And so as a result of that, I have a good understanding of kind of where the market and trend is going, like where I can kind of spot trends, like the massage gun trend. I kind of saw it before that trend was coming. I obviously had no idea it was going to be as big of a trend as it is today, but I knew that was going to be a big trend. Just seeing it early on, I could tell where it was headed. It's kind of like, you want to skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is. And that's kind of what I've always tried to do from a product development standpoint. I always recommend starting with private label because that's a good low cost, inexpensive, low risk way to get your idea out to market, see if there's viability for that category or that niche. And then as that product proves itself out, then maybe very quickly start investing into some customizations. And so what I like to do in terms of product development, I have a team of engineers that I work with, and they'll produce some CAD files, which are like these manufacturing files that you can then give to a factory and then tell them to make these molds and tooling, which are then used to create your finished product. And that's usually where I'll start, is I'll start private label. I'll see where the category is and see what the main competition looks like. Sometimes there may not be a lot of competition. And that's what I like. I like to be in more of a blue ocean. But you kind of want to have a mix. You don't want to be in categories where there's no traffic either, because you don't want to try. It's hard to create demand for a product rather than going into a category with some existing demand and creating something better. So a lot of times what I'll try to do is initially go in with a private label product, see how it does. If I'm able to, I'll try to take that private label product, make some small tweaks to it to make it a little bit better than the competition. And that could be tweaks to the product itself. It could be tweaks to even just the proposition and the offer. Maybe you're offering like a bundle or a bonus item or multi-pack or something like that. Something to just differentiate, give a little bit more value. And then, like I said, very quickly, after like 90 days or 6 months at the most, after I've seen some good traction, then I'll start to think about launching something more custom. And I've made the mistake in the past of trying to go very custom too early and just not validating those assumptions sooner. And then what happens is you invest so much money into intellectual property like patents, utility patents, design patents, trademarks, tooling, engineering costs, all this stuff, and then plus inventory. And then you find out that the market doesn't really even care about those unique aspects of your product or the design changes you made. They don't really care. So it just ends up being a huge waste of time and money. Then you kill the whole product. Super frustrating. So I don't do that anymore. Now I try to make sure to just validate it first, find out what the customers want. And the beauty of Amazon is they tell you, like if you look at the seller feedback, the customer reviews, the voice of the customer inside Seller Central, they tell you exactly what they like and don't like. So you can use that, especially like the 3 stars. The 3-star reviews are golden because those are very honest. And they'll tell you like, oh, I really like this, but I wish it was more like this, or I wish it had this, that, or the other. And you can use that to then improve your product. And again, I always recommend like trying to have an iterative process where you make one small improvement in the beginning rather than launching a lot of improvements at the same time, because that you could be making your product and the whole process way more expensive than it needs to be, and it could backfire.
Yeah, I love this. Just a lot of gold right there. Thank you so much for sharing that. For those who aren't familiar, can you talk about the private label versus custom piece of, give us an example or kind of just elucidate that difference a little more?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, when you sell a product on Amazon, most products that you see on Amazon, maybe not most, but many products are private label, meaning that like especially when you go into a category like a dog leash, for example, they all kind of look the same. Those are private label. These sellers are all going to the same Alibaba factories, and they're basically just putting their own name and branding on that private label product. So it's generic, basically. It just has a custom name on it. So private label essentially gives you the ability to work on your branding. And sometimes you can win just through pure marketing. So I've had products in the past that were purely private label. And the main thing I was competing on was just better creatives, better main image, better follow-up images and supporting images on Amazon, better A+ details page, better video content, better copy. You could have better creatives. It's harder to sustain your price because if you only rely on your creatives and you don't have any kind of moat around your product without some kind of intellectual property or some type of defensible customization that you have, then it tends to become a race to the bottom in price over time. So you'll start to see this downward pressure in terms of price because customers generally, they're going to start going towards these other products that are just cheaper, even if they don't have the fancy photos that your product has. If the customer looks at them and they're like, well, that's basically the same thing, so I'll just buy that one because it's way cheaper. But as long as the competition is relatively close to you in price, you can win purely on creatives and in terms of rankings and having more reviews, things like that. You can win just with that alone. But yeah, customization would be actually like having custom design files, which you'd need to get from an engineer. They'd have to create the manufacturing files. And then your factory, whether it be in the US or China, wherever they are, they take those files and they use that to build these molds, usually, is what they'll do. They'll build these like metal molds. And then, for example, if it's like a plastic product, they'll inject the plastic into this metal mold, this steel mold, to extract your units from it. And so that's generally what the purpose of the tooling is to allow them to actually custom make your product. And one tip I want to mention, if you're going to go down that road of custom tooling, especially if you're sourcing from China, a lot of times your Chinese factory might undercut you and allow other sellers to use your mold without telling you. So to try to avoid that, I always recommend make sure when you make your custom CAD designs, your manufacturing files, to put your trademark in there, to actually put it in there in your mold and tooling. So that way, if another seller tries to go to your factory somehow, and basically if they're double dealing and they're selling your product to them, they wouldn't be able to sell. You would know if it was your product because your logo would be on it, and you can take them down on Amazon really easily for trademark infringement. So always try to do that. And I believe the way you'd want to do it, if I'm remembering this correctly, is that I always get this kind of mixed up because, in terms of when you're making the mold, you can either emboss or deboss. And I believe what you would want is you'd want it to be debossed, which is basically your trademark and your logo in the steel, like cast mold, is depressed. So that way, when they make your plastic mold, when they pull the product out, your logo ends up being embossed, where it's basically raised. Actually, sorry, but you'd want it the opposite. Because what would I say? I always get this mixed up between the two. You'd want the tooling to be embossed, so it'd be debossed on your mold. And the reason for that is that if it's debossed on the mold, they could easily fill it so that it's flat. And then again, they could start double dealing and try to hide the fact that your trademark is on it. So that's a small but important tip, because unfortunately, no matter what relationship you think you have with your Chinese factory, unless you have a very, very solid, relationship or ownership in that factory, it happens quite more often than not. So you got to protect yourself and have that in there.
What a great story, and what a great tactic too of this. We're kind of in this complicated world with intellectual property. Historically in the US, we have legal protections for those things. The reality is we're in this globalized world. Things are being produced in China and elsewhere. And how do we make sure the intellectual property that we're creating, like you said, the patents and the trademarks are being protected? And oftentimes, if it's being manufactured or produced over there, someone else could just do it and basically do private label to us. So a way to protect that is put our logo, our information on there. That's genius. I have in another life, I thought I was going to be a professor. And there's this great story from Vladimir Nabokov, who wrote the novel Lolita, which was turned into a film and stuff later. And it was a very controversial book at the time. And because it was so controversial, he couldn't find a publisher for it. And so it was kind of these lesser known, sketchier publishers he had to deal with in the US and Europe. And when he went to protect the intellectual property of someone else was making copies of his novel and selling them without him getting, any sort of royalties on it, he took them to court. And when they said, how can you prove this is your novel and you did it? There were characters in the book or details that were anagrams of his name.
Oh,
so
wow.
he was able to prove to the judge that in the novel itself, he worked in his own identity, and there's no way they would have known unless they were the author, basically. So interesting story for people to look up. And that's what you said reminded me of that sort of in the physical world of e-commerce products in the modern world. So that's great. Thank you for including that. Something I've always been curious about, Kusha, as well, is in the software world, there's always this thing of, do I need to be a technical founder? Do I need to know how to code? I'm wondering, is there an analogy here in e-commerce where it's like we're dealing with CAD files, we're doing design, computer-aided drafting design is what we used to call it a long time ago, right? Is that something you need to know how to do as the entrepreneur, or are you able to communicate with people who have those design skills and kind of iterate and work that out without knowing how to do AutoCAD or what have you?
Yeah, no, I don't know how to I don't know how to design CAD files personally. I've never done that. That's something you just hire. No different than graphic design. Like I don't do any graphic design, so that's something you just hire out. You hire an expert who knows how to do it. And a lot of times, like with the engineers, for example, they give me both 2D and 3D drawings. So they'll give me CAD files, but they'll also give me like two-dimensional drawings on a PDF showing the dimensions, showing like kind of almost what would look like almost like patent drawings, where they're just line drawings. So you can see the sketch of everything, what it looks like, and the dimensions, the size, the reference, and the materials reference and so forth. And that's very easy for you to understand as the owner. So you can see, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Because you may not be able to open a CAD file on your computer. You may not be able to actually look at that. And that's not as big of a deal. You want to be able to reference the 2D files as well. So you can make sure that, hey, yes, this is the correct dimensions. They got the size right. They got the actual design correct. So that's what you want. You want to have both, really. But yeah, I don't personally, I don't think you have to have any expertise in any of that. I think it is not a bad idea to have an understanding of materials and kind of general design, but you don't need to be an expert in how to actually do CAD or graphic design or anything like that. That's just something you hire.
Pretty interesting. And I know you said you work with a team of engineers. You've got people you work with on that. Are those totally separate skill sets where we've got the designers over here and then the manufacturers elsewhere, and they communicate that way? Or is it sometimes is that all in-house of one shop's doing all that and you're working on the design and the product development? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically they're all kind of separate. The engineers are more like skilled engineers in different spaces. So there might be an engineer who's more skilled in like mechanical engineering, depending on what the product does or is. At some points, I may need to have my electrical engineer help with more of the electrical wiring and framework for that, because that's a little bit more complex and can be more expensive in terms of tooling and whatnot. So you get them involved. So yeah, the skill set of the engineer kind of depends on what the scope of the product is. And then graphics and stuff, like for the packaging, the inserts, the manual, all that, that would be a separate graphic designer, separate from the engineers. And then the actual factory and their team would be completely separate. I'm usually sourcing from China for the most part for a lot of products. So I'm going to the factory and saying, hey, here's my manufacturing files. And then their team, their factory will then, they have their own team of engineers usually too, which will kind of validate, or they might have to tweak some things depending on how it actually comes out in true production. They may have to tweak some stuff if it doesn't like come out quite right, or if they run into some kind of issues, because some things like sound great in theory, and then when you actually run the product and you produce it, you're like, oh shoot, this thing's way too thin, it's going to break. So they have to might have to thicken some things up and that sort of thing. But yeah, they're all separate, and then it's really you as the owner that's kind of, you know, acting as the conduit, working between them and orchestrating everything.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for talking about that. I'm curious too, from the first time you did this, you mentioned kind of that first product, I think coming from working in gyms and fitness, right? How did you approach that initially? And then maybe walk us through some of the learnings you've had. It sounds like some of the learnings of who the different people are, what the different skills are, how we piece all this together. But I'd love to know, how did you approach it then when you first tried, and how do you approach it differently now that you've been doing this for years?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the first product that we did was for something called blood flow restriction training, and they were called BFR bands, and it was a very specialized form of training that, you know, is commonly used in the gyms now. It was more in just physical therapy at the time, but now it's being used in health and fitness and strength training as well. And yeah, at the time, we didn't know anything about sourcing from China. So initially, we were sourcing from a US strap manufacturer. And we went to them and basically said, hey, just want to, I think we just pulled some of the off the shelf types of components they had and said, hey, can we combine this with that and then put it together in this way? And I think they even did, I don't remember if they did the packaging or if they actually might have actually sent the product to us. And I think we had to do the kitting and the assembly. So we had to assemble the product. I think we might have even printed the instructions somewhere else. Like we had the instructions printed from another company online, and then had that sent to us, and then yeah, polybagged everything, labeled it, barcoded it, and then sent it into FBA. And again, the beauty of all that at the time, and even today, is that FBA is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So if you're building a business on the side as a side hustle, or if it's a full-time thing, you know, Amazon's doing all the heavy lifting with regard to the third-party logistics, with regard to even customer service. Like if a customer wants to return something, they're actually contacting Amazon first. And the only time you ever really get a question from the customer is if they have like more of a product or seller related question. Otherwise, you really never hear from any customers. Even when we were doing, you know, with that one of our brands that was doing 8 figures, we were selling hundreds, maybe 1,000 units a day. And I would only get like 1 or 2 or 3 messages a day from customers, like very few messages. So you didn't even need to have like a customer service representative really, because you could just handle that yourself. It wasn't a big workload.
Yeah, that's a great insight. You also talked a bit about there's even low-hanging fruit in there of just doing basic optimization on your product listings, on your brand listings, right? Of better images, better descriptions, answer the questions, and so on. My new business partner, Mark Hope, is more versed in Amazon than I am, and that's kind of what he says of there's just always a lot to optimize. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that people don't touch. And so even if you're starting with private label, you can win on the marketing, like you said. And then once you're going into that product development side and doing custom work, it sounds like you're looking at competitor reviews and things like that, learning what to fix. doing that with the custom work and making the product better itself. And you've kind of got both of those things going, of the product development and the marketing. I wonder if you could just reflect more on, you've got all these pieces, like you said, Amazon handles so much. We've got designers, we've got engineers. What do you see as your job as the entrepreneur? It sounds like it's that piece of skating where the puck's going, but maybe you could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is you got to be a product person. And so you have to really understand, like, okay, what do I need to do to make this product better? And you should always try to figure out how can I continually make it better. If you get complacent, then eventually your competitor could come in and take a lot of market share away from you. So you want to always try to be competing with yourself and make that product better over time. So I would say product is a huge component, and that's one hat you have to wear, and probably one of the most important. Second part would be the advertising and the marketing. You need to do that, or you could outsource it, but you should at least have a general understanding of like what your metrics are, your KPIs are for your business based on your cost of goods and your net margin. You should know like what you can afford to spend to acquire a customer. Those are important things to know as an owner. And again, you could hand it off and have a media buyer or an agency run the actual marketing for you and the advertising for you, or you could do it yourself. And then even the creatives, I think it's good to get good creative direction from a graphic designer and get their input, just like you would with engineers. But again, the engineers and the graphic designer, they most likely won't understand the end user and the customer at the same depth and level as you. So you will still have to give direction, and revisions need to be coming from you. So don't just take their word for it that, yeah, this is going to do well just because the designs look nice. You need to look at it from the lens of like, okay, what is the customer going to want? And then also look at it, how will it represent in the Amazon search results? If someone's scanning Amazon search results for that niche, is your main image going to stand out, or is it going to blend in with the rest? And if it blends in and it's kind of a commoditized category, then you're kind of competing on price only, which is not a good place to be. So you need to think about, okay, how can I tell this graphic designer to make some tweaks to this main image and the supporting images so that my value proposition and the product really stands out and is conveyed properly. And same with engineering. You want to make sure that the engineers will come up with some crazy ideas, but you need to be the one to say, no, this is the direction that I need to go. These are the features that must be implemented in the process or in the product itself. These are the key features, and everything else. I feel like most of the time, less is more. You don't want to necessarily reinvent the wheel. In most cases, that's where it can backfire if you over improve an existing product that's out there. Like if you find a niche and you're like, oh yeah, all these people are selling these dog leashes, I could sell this one that's way better, and I'm going to do 20 different things to make it better. I would probably pick like 1, 2, or 3 things to make it better out of those 20 ideas you have. And then maybe over time, if you wanted to, you could expand and slowly add those other features. But it usually hurts when you add too many things too quickly, because the things that the people really wanted kind of get lost and diluted in the other things you're doing. Or they may really hate the 20th thing that you added, that 20th feature. They might hate it so much that it completely negates the benefits of the 2 or 3 awesome features that you added.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to lean startup. It could be software, It could be physical products, but you have an idea of what's going to make this thing better, and it may or may not, and it may or may not be worth paying for. And there's something about Microsoft Excel. I think it's most users use less than 5% of the functionality in Excel. And it's been totally over engineered for years and decades, basically, and now it's 100%. Like you can't even find the basic thing you need. So that's interesting. Is this a good time to talk about Kazam? You mentioned the advertising piece. Sure. Tell us a bit about that. What is Kazam?
Yeah, Kazam is something I've been working on for a couple of years. And so I basically took everything that I was doing manually in terms of Amazon advertising and managing ads for my business and clients, and I put it into a software that integrates AI to basically automate a lot of that process. And also the cool thing about it is that the Kazam software, what it does, the main hook that it does that's different than everyone else, is that it will actually increase your profitability and reduce your advertising expense as your products rank higher organically. And that's something I haven't seen any other advertising software for Amazon do. And I feel like this was an important feature for me because Amazon has just gotten so expensive over the years. Not only has PPC costs continually risen, but also just the cost of Amazon fees. They're charging you all these different fees. They used to charge you fees if your product was in storage at FBA for too long, like long-term storage fees. they still do that. Plus they charge you fees if you don't have enough inventory. If you have like less than 28 days worth of inventory, they're going to charge you additional fees, and then plus inbound fees. And there's a lot of fees that they're getting you with. And I don't think that's going to stop. I think it's going to get more and more expensive. And so I have seen just a downward pressure on margins in general with Amazon. Like what would have been like a acceptable 40 or 50% margin a few years ago is like the 20 or 30% margin today. So that was one key feature that I wanted to integrate into this that makes it really such a great tool, because it will track your product's organic position. So as your product starts to go up in rankings, my whole philosophy is, why am I paying Amazon twice? I'm already paying them a 15% referral fee for bringing me that sale. Why should I also pay them an outrageous cost per click? In some cases, I've seen $15 CPCs, some even higher. I've seen $30 to $60 cost per click, believe it or not, in some cases. So it's just absolutely outrageous. Not to mention, I've seen so much black hat competitor sabotage where they send fake clicks and Amazon won't do anything about it. And they say that they supposedly track that, but I haven't seen them really do anything about that or refund PPC sabotage. And that can be really costly. So yeah, I would say Kazam is really great for anybody who's a beginner or intermediate who really wants something that would, if they can't afford a media buyer and they're like, you know what, I need something to help me run my Amazon ads with a very hands-off approach that they can focus on the product and the creatives and that sort of thing, and let the software do what it needs to do. Or if somebody is more advanced and they want to be more hands-on, it does have a lot of flexibility and features where they can go in and they can craft the software to function and stay within certain limits that they want it to stay in. If they say, hey, you know what, I have certain seasonality or day parting that I want to integrate, you can do that. If you want to target certain competitors, you can do that. If you want to target certain brands or ASINs, you can tell the software to do that. And the software will automatically create all the necessary campaigns to target everything that needs to be targeted. And then the cool thing too, one thing that I do manually that the software does in an automated way, is that as the customer search terms start to convert, so like, for example, when you have a manual campaign and you're targeting a bunch of keywords, if you go into that in your advertising dashboard and you look at your historical conversion and clicks and such, there's a tab that says customer search terms, and the customer search terms will show you what were the actual end customer search terms from those exact match, phrase match, or broad match keywords that you targeted. What was the actual search term that ended up resulting in a sale? And our software will automatically take those winning search terms and then dump them into your manual campaigns so you can target those specifically. So, and it will over time, you can negate keywords that aren't relevant. So it'll go through and negate, it will do the opposite as well. It'll negate things that are potentially like costing you a ton of money, but not getting you any sales, just getting a lot of clicks, and they're not really that relevant.
Great insights there. And that's awesome. You built a tool to automate that piece. I know you have an agency as well. So Kazam is at gokazam.com if people want to check it out. I see you have launchtitans.com as well, the agency. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Launch Titans, I was actually a client of Launch Titans originally, and I actually still am today. They still run a lot of my e-commerce stuff, marketing and whatnot. But yeah, I had an opportunity to buy out one of the partners, and so I became kind of a larger shareholder in the business in the last couple of years. And yeah, it's a full service agency. So we do everything, not just Amazon. And I would say the specialty of Launch Titans is building lead acquisition funnels. But on the Amazon side, it's full service. Our team will run the entire Amazon account. They'll run the Amazon advertising. And then we even have aspects that we can do, like I mentioned, where we have a team of engineers. If somebody's like, hey, you know what, I need help with customizing my product, getting some design ideas, getting the CAD files, getting the manufacturing files, and maybe even getting some help finding some factories and sourcing the product and manufacturing it. We can help with all of that aspect as well. So yeah, it's a pretty wide array of services, but those are the things we specialize in.
That's cool. It's interesting because you started on the product side. Now you got a foot in the agency side too. How do you think about that personally? It sounds like it helps your companies and does both things. Oftentimes I think people have grass is greener thinking. I get it too. I'm talking with e-commerce entrepreneurs. And I'm like, man, I want to get back into a product business. How do you think about a service business in the mix of what you're doing?
Well, the service business I actually really enjoy. I really like working with clients. It's fun to see new products and seeing them grow and helping them scale is a lot of fun. But for me, I really like also developing my own products And I think the main reason is it makes me stay relevant. Like I like to stay in the game. I feel like if I wasn't actually selling on Amazon myself, being successful with it today, it would be hard for me to provide guidance and strategic direction for clients as to how to scale their business. Because if I'm not doing it, like I don't know how I'm going to be, coaching it or teaching it.
Yeah, you've really got to have your hands in the pie. Got to see what's changing and what's new. So that's great. All right. Well, people can check out gokazam.com as well as launchtitans.com. Anywhere else that people can find you or that they should reach out?
Yeah, if they wanted to reach out to me directly, I also have meetkusha.com. Meetkusha.com is another place where they can reach out to me, or I also have a course on there as well. Had that for a while, and it's a very, very simple but comprehensive course that dives into basically like how to build, scale, and exit your e-commerce or Amazon brand. So if somebody's interested in figuring out like how do I build an Amazon business, how do I build those custom products, and then if I wanted to sell that, what's the process of actually exiting that and selling that business? That's what that course goes into right there. It's about, I think, 12 hours worth of content, something like that.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing this. I'll have to check this out. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Kusha, and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.